Hello, everybody. My name's Doug Johnston. I work for Ernst & Young, and I lead our climate change and sustainability practice. What I wanted to share with you today is the role of the investor in driving the climate agenda for major corporates. We've all seen major corporates really go out there and set increasingly stringent targets themselves as they strive towards net zero. But what has the role of the investor been in actually making that happen? And that's what I'd like to explore now. So I've got a few slides, so bear with me, and hopefully this can guide the discussion that we're going to have. So we've seen the headlines, haven't we, of investors stepping out and saying how important they see climate change in an understanding of an organization's performance. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that organizations are demanding the disclosure of their climate performance. Some investors are asking large corporates to commit to increasingly stringent targets. And what we've got here are a few headlines of companies that have responded. So we've got Nestle, we've got Royal Dutch Shell, we've got power generation. So it's not just investors placing pressure on the oil and gas companies. Actually, they're starting to engage with a whole range of sectors in terms of the role that climate change plays in the performance of those businesses. Now, it's not that the investors necessarily are being altruistic. They recognize the very close link between financial performance and the way in which organizations respond to climate change. They're recognizing that some organizations' markets are going to be significantly disrupted by climate change, or increasing regulation is going to increase the cost base on companies, or that the physical changes of climate change are going to disrupt an organization's supply chains or their ability to maintain and operate infrastructure. So they're not doing it for altruistic reasons. They're doing it primarily because they recognize this link between an organization's response to climate change and the future viability of the business. So at EY, we do lots of surveys, as you'd probably expect. And about 3 months ago, we completed a survey of over 300 institutional investors. And the purpose of the survey was to understand how investors were really starting to engage companies on their non-financial performance and what they were looking for from companies in terms of that performance. And what I've got here are some of the statistics that I've drawn out from that. And this is the key question that this is responding to. So we asked the question, in the past 12 months, how frequently has a company's non-financial performance played a pivotal role in your investment decision-making? And you can see the statistics for yourself. 91% of companies over the course of the last 12 months considered non-financial information as being pivotal in the investment decisions that they've made. And 43% of them said that that was frequently, so over many of the decisions that they'd made, and 48% saying occasionally. So this is massive. I mean, what does this actually mean? It means that the investment decisions that are made of some of the largest companies in the world, and those decisions that underpin our investment, our pension pots, are based on decisions that link to the non-financial performance, and increasingly not just the non-financial performance, but the performance of a company in relation to climate change. Now, what about the information that organizations share on their performance in relation to climate change? Many of you will be aware of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So increasingly, organizations are being asked to demonstrate the link between climate change and their long-term financial prospects. And the task force makes a series of recommendations for how organizations start to disclose that information to investors such that investors can make informed decisions on it. Now, again, we do lots of surveys, and we looked at 900 of the world's largest organizations and how they're disclosing climate risk. And we looked at their compliance with the recommendations of the task force. And what we've seen is that actually, whilst there is progress in climate-related disclosure, i.e. the information that investors can use to make decisions, it's not of the best quality. So whilst there's 54% coverage of the recommendations, only 27% of the information meets the quality thresholds that we would expect. I mean, let me just give you an example of that. So you've got a lot of organizations that are starting to say, our material climate risks relate to a change in weather patterns, which disrupts our supply chains. It relates to increasing regulation that might place an additional cost associated with the carbon emissions that we release. What's missing from a lot of these disclosures are the numbers. So how much of an impact is that? How will you be disrupted? Under what circumstance will you be disrupted? And what difference will that make in terms of your ability to achieve your strategy? So what's really missing is this tangible link between climate-related information and information relating to the financial performance of the company. So in the absence of this information, what are organizations doing? So organizations that certainly we're working with are increasingly looking at sophisticated ways in which they can understand the impact of a changing climate on their business. Many of you will be aware of the scenario modeling that companies are doing, looking at a 2-degree or a 4-degree scenario and looking at how the projected changes in temperature or sea level or weather patterns might affect their infrastructure and how they can provide for that, or how it might affect the sourcing regions that they have. So data has a massive role to play in terms of giving investors what they want, but also potentially modeling the market. You know, how is demand for your product going to be affected by changing attitudes towards climate change? How quick will the switch be to electrification, and what impact might that have on your company? Or the switch from liquid fuels to electric vehicles. I mean, what impact is that going to have on your business, and how do you model that? So increasingly, companies are looking at much more sophisticated models to look at this link between climate and financial performance. What I wanted to share is an investor initiative called Climate Action 100. Now, we've been working with Climate Action 100 over the last 3 months, and they've recently released a new benchmark framework, which provides a structured way in which investors can look into the full spectrum of the programs that underpin the climate goals of an organization. Now, what this stems from is you've got lots of organizations that are now coming out with, you know, we believe that to protect shareholder value, we need to commit to a very stringent carbon reduction target. And what investors are increasingly doing is asking the questions of the company and demanding information which enables them to get beneath that. So let's say an organization sets a target for net zero. Well, do they have the CapEx plans in place to support that? Do they have the stakeholder relationships which will enable that? Do they have the right governance infrastructure that can enable them to monitor progress against that? Do they have the right senior leaders that are accountable for it? So what Climate Action 100 are doing is they've established a framework which enables investors to ask those questions and to analyze that information and then to benchmark companies from a climate risk perspective. They've also become quite a lobbying group, and you'll have seen from the headlines that I shared earlier that Climate Action have been really active in driving change across some major corporates, in encouraging them to set targets which set their course towards the Paris Agreement. I'm nearly coming into land here, but some of the things that I just wanted to share with you is that if you're a major corporate and you're looking at your climate strategy, your investors will have a view as to how climate affects your business. It's really important that you're able to understand that story for yourselves and set targets that enable you to appropriately manage the risks and opportunities in your business that enables you to get to where you need to get to in terms of supporting the world to get to the Paris Agreement. Investors are becoming increasingly sophisticated in the way in which they're engaging companies. And what we're seeing is that investors are using this information not just to influence change, but it is starting to influence the investment decisions that they make. And investors themselves are now setting commitments towards net zero. So I'm going to stop there. Do email me at EY if you have any questions. But I'm very pleased that I was able to meet with you today, and thank you very much. Hopefully that's been helpful. Bye-bye.